What's up everybody, Rob here. So, I am a fan of the fantasy genre. And as much as I love fantasy and I love the genre of fantasy in general, I think there are a few cliches that really need to be addressed. Well, one in particular, and that is technological advancement, specifically in regards to weaponry. Now, obviously, who doesn't love a sword fight? I mean, you got characters hacking and slashing at each other. You got, people getting disemboweled. I mean, it's thrilling stuff. Who doesn't love a good disembowelment every now and then? I mean, seriously, it's great stuff. But I want to ask a question. And why aren't there guns in fantasy? And by extension, why is everybody always consistently at a medieval level of technology? Now, the short answer is because J.R.R. Tolkien, granddaddy of the fantasy genre. He did it. Everybody else has to do it. It's pretty much, well, that's pretty much the way it is. He created pretty much the idea of all the major fantasy races, humans, elves, dwarves, orcs, trolls. Those are all pretty much his creation in a sort of pseudo-medieval type setting. That's the way it is, and that's pretty much the convention of the genre. Now, in normal human development terms, over 1,000 years or over a certain period of time, it would be unlikely that a society would maintain the same level of technology. They would constantly be growing, constantly be experimenting with new technologies and new innovations, and then coming up with solutions to problems. This is, of course, barring anything like Dark Ages, massive societal collapses, plagues, earthquakes, or any sort of massive environmental disasters, anything like that. But still, even within the fantasy genre, it's just the cliche that's going to be taking place in a medieval type setting. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this in particular. A very well thought out plot, compelling characters, very good storyline can easily make up for previously used and, in my opinion, somewhat overused cliches. So again, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. I personally am of the belief that there's no such thing as a bad concept, only bad execution. Well, in any case, I'm going to be talking about firearms and why they actually make sense in a fantasy setting. Now, I'm going to be talking in extremely broad strokes here. This is mostly for the epic fantasy and the heroic fantasy genres, not really so much the urban fantasy that takes place in our world, and firearms are available. Harry Dresden, if I'm not mistaken, carries around a 44. Okay, first up, there's the magic. Now, of course, this is contingent on what type of magic is available and also how commonplace it is. If it's something very, I don't know how else to describe it, very explosive, something involves like people shooting fireballs or bolts of lightning at each other or summoning up demons or something like that, something that you can, basically you have a built-in ranged weapon on you. I mean, if everybody has the ability to shoot fireballs out of their hands or have some sort of magical ability, like in the Codex Alera series, it really doesn't make sense to innovate. Everybody can shoot a fireball from your hand. You can shoot lightning out of your fingertips. Well, you don't need firearms. You don't need any sort of extra weaponry. It's, built in. No real point in innovating in that regard. That would stifle technological progress. But if magic is at least relatively commonplace and it's being used in a combative way, if there's, say, battle mages or something of that nature, and the vast majority of people don't have magical abilities, it would behoove that society to create something to even out the odds in case they do have to fight a magic user. I mean, traditional tactics in the medieval world and pretty much the pre-gunpowder world, and even into the gunpowder world, would to be standing in very close order formation, pretty much right next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping if you have shields, in a giant shield wall or a pike block or something of that nature, which is very effective against, yes, a pike block is very effective against another pike block, yes. That's called a perfect target for artillery or any sort of ranged weapon, and it's especially a good target for a mage. So if I was a soldier in a fantasy army, and I'm up against a bunch of spellcasters, and I have no ability to cast magic at all, you think I want to cross, an open football field, with this thing to run up to this guy and stab him in the face, cross this open field under fire so I can, get that one shot in? No, that'd be suicide, especially if I'm in a massive block. I mean, that's just screaming target. I wouldn't want one of those. I'd want something that I can reach out and hit the guy, something to even out the odds. Now, of course, there are ranged weapons from the Middle Ages. You have catapults and ballistas and other types of larger artillery pieces. You also have slings and bow and arrow and javelins and crossbows. True, yes, they absolutely do work, but they require a certain degree of skill to use. Again, it's possible, but they have their limitations. A longbow requires a certain degree of physical strength. A crossbow has a very short range. A sling is really, I mean, you can get very good with it with enough skill, but without it, at most you can do is sort of a barrage. You can, sling the stones straight up, and then they come crashing down on your enemy kind of en masse. But then again, you have to do this en masse, which makes you a perfect target. So if there was a society that was constantly going up against mages and magic users in general, using swords and spears are probably a good way to get yourself killed. Again, ranged weaponry from the Middle Ages is perfectly viable, provided, of course, you had the skill for it. An English longbow, for example, it would take several years for someone to actually be able to pick up the skill, just the physical strength of drawing a 100+ pound longbow and being able to use that effectively. Whereas a firearm, an afternoon. I mean, not effectively. Yes, I mean you're not going to be exactly SEAL Team 6 here, but you're going to be able to use a firearm much faster and much more effectively than, say, a longbow or a crossbow. Someone who's completely untrained is going to be able to use a firearm much more quickly and much more effectively than a longbow or a crossbow or a sling. That was actually one of the reasons for the massive increase in the size of armies. If you look up just any major battle in history, at least from the Middle Ages, armies were relatively small, and then came firearms. Well, with firearms, anybody can just go through the steps of reloading. Yes, it was a pain at the time, but you could just, teach a complete idiot the steps, to reload and fire, and you don't have any certain physicality there. You just need to be able to physically go through the motions, lift the firearm, and fire. As opposed to a longbow or a crossbow, where you have to, crossbow, you have to draw the thing up. I know they had winches and such, but there's a physicality there, and there's a certain degree of physicality with a longbow, again, like I said before, and with a sling, well, that thing requires a great deal of finesse. Squeezing a trigger doesn't require any of this, or at least not as much. Therefore, it would behoove a society to focus on weaponry that's more capable of taking out magic users at a distance before the magic user can engage. Now, this brings me to my second point: dragons. Yes, seriously, dragons. Think about it. You have a world populated by flying, fire-breathing, winged death machines. You better have some serious countermeasures for dealing with these guys. And no running up to them with a sword and trying to stab them. Yeah, seriously. Do you have any idea? Try to kill an elephant with a sword. Now imagine something that can kill an elephant with its breath. It breathes fire. It can kill an elephant or carry off an elephant. And you want me to run up this thing and stick them with a spear or a sword? We have a word in our language for fighting a dragon in close quarter. It's called suicide. Again, there are non-gunpowder alternatives. Again, for dealing with something that big, I don't think an arrow is really... try using a bow and arrow against an elephant or a hippo. I mean, these are giant animals, but they're tiny compared to some versions of fantasy dragons. And an arrow's just going to annoy it. It's really just going to make it angry, and, well, you just now have an irate, angry, fire-breathing winged death machine. Congratulations, mission accomplished. Again, there are things like artillery, catapults, ballista, things of that nature, which, could work, certainly, yes. But these things are not really good on rough terrain. Try, dragging a catapult through the mountains. It's not the best system. And also you have to take into consideration that large medieval siege equipment is not really designed to hit moving targets. I mean, a ballista, yeah, you kind of can maneuver around a bit. A Roman-style ballista, yeah, you can move that a bit. A catapult, a trebuchet, yeah, I mean, they can take out a dragon if it hits it, but, how do you aim one of those things? These things are designed to hit walls. And I'm going to shock you all here. You sitting down? You ready? Breathe deep, ready? Walls don't move. Yeah, I know. Mind-blowing. So these things are not designed to hit fast-moving, flying targets. They're difficult enough to hit with modern firearms. With this huge immobile catapult, it's just really not an effective system. So while there may be alternatives to this, I really don't think that, a rickety catapult being hauled over the mountains is in any way superior to an M250 caliber machine gun with armor-piercing bullets. And it's not limited to just dragons. Again, depending on the setting you're in, you could be dealing with giants, griffins, ogres, trolls, creatures that really just need to die, and they need to die at far range. I mean, do you want to get into a close combat with a giant? I played Skyrim. It doesn't end well. It never ends well. You see, necessity is the mother of invention. There is a need. There are these creatures that need to die. There are these magic users that are a threat to society, threat to my personal safety, and engaging them close quarter is detrimental to my health. So I'm going to want to come up with methods that are very effective at long range. All technological innovation is based on this principle. So if you're in a fantasy world, if you're living in a fantasy world where you have magic users, where you have large, exceedingly dangerous creatures, it's in your best interest to come up with some sort of weapon or some sort of technology that helps even the odds out. Ultimately, pragmatism would rule, and people would try to come up with some way to even the odds. So when it comes right down to it, you can rescue the princess with one of these or one of these. Now, like I said, having a fantasy story set in a medieval type world, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. I just want to see authors, if there's any authors, aspiring authors out there, try to come up with something a little bit more, well, not medieval. And, you know, everybody does Roman stuff too for some reason. I don't know why the appeal for Rome. I mean, I love Roman history too. I love Rome too. But it's either Middle Ages or Rome. Set something with the modern day. I know Brandon Sanderson is with the Mistborn series. I know there's kind of an Old West series with the Wax and Wayne saga. And I know I've heard rumors. I don't know how true it is, but there's going to be a another trilogy set in the Mistborn universe 200 years after that, which is going to have modern technology, so that's always promising. But I just think that, you know, having firearms and having modern technology is just really a natural outgrowth of living in a fantasy environment. If anything, that would just spur on innovation that much further. Again, there are caveats, but yeah, there you go. So that's pretty much it for this video. Hit the like and subscribe button. You can also follow me on Twitter. There's going to be a link down below. I'm also always looking for any kind of good fantasy novels, so if you can just leave a suggestion. My personal preferences are epic and heroic fantasy, but I also do like urban fantasy. I'm a huge fan of the Dresden Files. And pretty much anything involving, well, I love military history, so anything involving lots of combat, fighting, stuff like that. I mean, politics too. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Song of Ice and Fire series. I liked it before there was a TV show. Yes, I'm one of those people. Big fan of the Wheel of Time series. It did drag at times, but you know, yeah, it was good. Like Brandon Sanderson, he does excellent work. Really, one of my favorite authors is David Gemmell. I mean, who doesn't love David Gemmell? I mean, you know, you got guys with swords stabbing other guys with swords. I mean, it's great stuff. Big fan of Larry Correia too. So anything in that particular vein, yeah, Larry Correia. There you go, gun guy in fantasy. Anyway, so just leave a suggestion, your favorite fantasy novels, anything else you might think I might find interesting. So that's pretty much it. See you later. Have a good day. Or don't. You're adults. Make your own decisions.